Everything there is to say about health care has already been said. When it comes to the substance of the legislation, this may be true. I suspect that's why an overwhelming majority of Americans oppose it. Americans know exactly what's in this bill, and they've rejected it. They do not want it to pass. But there's still a lot to be said about the process that Democrats are using to force this bill through. That won't change whether they get their votes this week or not. The fact is, the die has already been cast on this Congress. Democrat leaders have been imploring members to make history, they say, by voting for this bill. But this Congress is already guaranteed to go down in history, not for any piece of legislation, but for the arrogant way that it's dictated to the American people what's best for them, and for the ugly way in which it's gone about getting around the will of the American people. Democratic leaders have made it perfectly clear that they view their constituents as an obstacle, particularly on the issue of health care. At every turn, they've met fierce public opposition. And every time they've tried to come up with a way to get around that fierce public opposition. It's become a vicious cycle. The harder Democrats try to get around the public, the more repellent their proposals become, and the more egregious their efforts become to get them through anyway. We watched last summer as they forced their partisan health care bill through the committees. We watched as they tried to sell it to the public as something other than what it was. We watched as they wrote the final bill behind closed doors, then wheeled and dealed to get the last few votes they needed to squeeze it through both chambers on a party line vote. We saw the Cornhusker kickback, the Louisiana Purchase, Gatorade, and all the rest. But as ugly as all this was, as distasteful as all these deals have been, they were child's play compared to the scheme they've been cooking up over in the House just this week. The plan that Speaker Pelosi has hatched for getting this bill through is to try to pull the wool over the eyes of the public, and it's jaw-dropping. It is jaw-dropping in its audacity. Here's their plan. Speaker Pelosi can't get enough of her Democratic majority to vote for the Senate version of the bill. So she and her allies have concocted a way to pass it without actually casting a vote on it. They're concocting a way to pass it without actually casting a vote on it. The so-called slaughter solution, in which the Senate bill is, quote, deemed to have passed. This way, they'll claim they never voted for it, even though they'll vote to send it to the president for a signature. This scheme and deem approach has never been tried on a bill of this scope, according to today's Washington Post. This is how they'll try to keep their fingerprints off a bill that forces taxpayers to cover the cost of abortions, that cuts Medicare by $500 billion, raises taxes by $500 billion, raises insurance premiums, which creates a brand new government entitlement program at a time when the entitlement programs we already have are on the verge of bankruptcy, and which vastly expands the cost and reach of the federal government in Washington at a time when most Americans think government is already entirely too big. As Speaker Pelosi put it, nobody wants to vote for the Senate bill. But anyone who believes they can send this bill to the president without being tarred by it is absolutely delusional. Anybody who thinks this is a good strategy isn't thinking clearly. They're too close to the situation. They don't realize that this is a strategy. They don't realize that this strategy is the only thing that they or this Congress will be remembered for. Anyone who endorses this strategy will be forever remembered for trying to claim they didn't vote for something they did. they will be forever remembered by claiming they didn't vote for something that they did vote for. It will go down as one of the most extraordinary legislative sleights of hand in history. Make no mistake, this will be a career-defining and a Congress-defining vote. Make no mistake, this will be a career-defining and a Congress-defining vote. Most of the time, the verdict of history is hard to predict. In this case, it's not. Anyone who endorses this strategy will be remembered for it. On the other hand, anyone who decides in a moment of clarity that they should resist this strategy will be remembered for standing up to party leadership that lost its way. Democratic leaders continue to advance the false argument that this effort is somehow akin to certain legislative efforts of the past. There is no comparison. First of all, the good programs they're referring to were far more modest. They enjoyed broad support from both parties in Congress. Most importantly, they enjoyed broad support of the American people. By contrast, there is no bipartisan consensus about this bill in Congress. It aims to reshape no less than 1/6 of our entire economy at a moment when our economy is already suffering and our existing debts threaten to drown us in a sea of red ink. More importantly, Americans overwhelmingly oppose it. And if you need any evidence of that, look no further than today's Washington Post, which calls this process unseemly, or the Cincinnati Enquirer, which calls it disgusting. And look no further than the president's own pollster, who's telling the White House that the chicanery the Democrats have used to advance this measure is a serious problem. This entire effort has been a travesty. A travesty. But the latest solution to give House members a way out by telling them they can pretend they didn't vote for something they will in fact be voting for has sealed its fate. The latest solution to give House members a way out by telling them they can pretend they didn't vote for something that they will be in fact voting for has sealed the fate of this legislation with the American public. It's time for rank-and-file Democrats to pull the fire alarm and save the American people from this latest scheme and this unpopular bill. The process has been tainted. It's time to end the vicious cycle. Start over, cleanse the process, and work on the step-by-step reforms the American people really want. It's time to recognize that constituents are not obstacles. Constituents are not obstacles to overcome with schemes and sweetheart deals. Fortunately, Madam President, it's not too late. I yield the floor.